Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Joel Dubin says if you follow his advice, it will lead to disaster. I hope I got that right. Joel, did I say that correctly?
You did say that correctly. You follow the rules in my book and you'll run your business into the ground.
Okay, I guess I got it right. But now that's even more interesting because we have to ask you some more questions about this. What's the title of your book? Tell us.
So the title of the book is The 7 Habits of Highly Dysfunctional Companies.
Let me repeat that. Highly dysfunctional companies, you said.
That's right. Highly dysfunctional companies.
Okay. Now, you got to tell us, what's your purpose in that? Because how many people want to know how to be dysfunctional?
Well, actually, the purpose, first of all, is actually comic relief. So I'm a retired cybersecurity consultant, and it's part of it is therapy for me, dealing the frustrations that I had dealing with various clients, working at some of these companies. And I just noticed these patterns over and over, working with these companies for decades. And I noticed sort of these common habits that a lot of these companies run into. But kind of on a serious note, Bill, you could also say the book, I call it an anti-manual of how not to run a business. So you should kind of take everything in the book and do the opposite.
Okay,
that's fair enough. Teach you ways of like what you're doing wrong and what you shouldn't be doing if you want to succeed. Because if you seriously do follow what's in the book, you'll go out of business pretty quickly and pretty well. The ship will sink pretty fast. I like the way you describe your background because effectively, I'm guessing you were kind of like the fly on the wall. You were there. They probably didn't even notice you going about your business and your work, and yet picking up things that are going right and wrong just for your own information and probably things that you would avoid if you open up your own company. Well, I would say I wasn't exactly the fly in the wall. I was an auditor. I was actually the fly swatter that made their life miserable and kind of poked around and asked a lot of uncomfortable questions. But yes, that's a good way to describe it, Bill. Now,
has remote work helped or hurt these dysfunctional companies?
Okay, I talk a lot about remote work. It's an interesting thing because I actually had finished the book or close to finished it just before COVID hit. And when COVID hit and everybody had to work remote, I realized, I don't have anything in here about remote work. So I added a lot about remote work. Does it help? Does it hurt? Well, again, just as with the rest of the book, I make a lot of jokes about it. I say, for example, there are rules that every employee that works remotely should be clothed at all times. And if they don't have their pants or their skirt on, they shouldn't stand up during a Zoom call and things like that. But the conclusion that I come to, kind of the serious conclusion, is I don't think it's black and white. In other words, it depends both on two things, on the personality of the individual. Some people work better remote. Some people work better in the office. I found personally that there was a lot of distractions in the office, people always coming by. I found that I could shut my door and get more work done remote. And it's also the nature of the work. Certain industries, require kind of a personal presence. Other things, like a lot of the security reviews that I did were interviews that could be done about policies that didn't require being on site, and even some of the sophisticated technical testing can be done remotely with a lot of the tools. But in the other industries, like I hear, like in investment banking, for example, it's really important for the parties involved in the deal to kind of be able to read each other's body language, right? So you have to have a presence. So, I guess what I made fun of in the book was these CEOs that say, you must come into the office or you can stay out. It's not an all or nothing kind of a thing. I think the reality is going to be a hybrid work environment.
And, I was just thinking back to your point about a kind of a comedy view of businesses. I was once at a meeting years ago, and the speakers, I think there were about 100 people there, and the speaker said, how many people here are using the fax machine? And, I love the fax machine. And my hand was going up, and he goes, that's right, hardly anybody still uses a fax machine. And I quickly made a turn and fixed my tie as if that was my purpose all the way through. But it did make a great point to me because I went back to the office and said, wait, if at this point already others aren't using the fax machine, I better get on board with the future because if I'm the only one, they're not going to get my faxes. They're not going to be receptive to it. And I'm going to be stuck. And also I'm going to be the guy that they kind of look at and say, yeah, he's kind of out of sync with the world. Let's forget him. So it really does put a light on things that go on. Now I'm going to ask you, can you reveal some of these 7 habits, maybe even all 7?
Well, okay, so the first one I say is if it makes sense, don't do it. And that's the fundamental habit. There's so many little things. I started out with talking about office supplies, how it's easier to go out on the street and go to a stationery store than it is to go through the supply office within a company. But on a bigger scale, just getting anything done in a dysfunctional company, there's meetings and committees and approvals and layers of bureaucracy. So a lot about that. And also just ignoring basic customer requests. I found many dysfunctional companies that, like a retail chains, there'd be a store in a popular location. They closed it. Why? People want to be in that store. Why are you doing that? Those kinds of crazy things, or moving the office away from the employees to be closer to executives who, are much higher paid, and the employees can't afford to live out where the executives are. So just a lot of crazy things. So the second thing I have is turf battles are part of the corporate culture. That's where I talk about how basically in a dysfunctional company, it's at war with itself. You have all these different factions and cliques and little fiefdoms and people fighting each other. A lot of them are not even interested in the business. They're interested in their personal power, and how many employees they have, how many headcount they have. That's where I talk about that. And then that kind of leads into the next thing about poor communication, where I say poor communication delivers the message. That's the third habit. And I talk about excessive emails. Employees should be bombarded with emails to the point of confusion. I talk about how employees at dysfunctional companies are often wearing neck braces because their heads are going back and forth from all the announcements coming from the company, half of which don't make sense or don't follow any kind of pattern. So I talk about communication. And then the next level of communication after the email, it's kind of the real thing that really mucks up the works in most companies, is meetings, the bane of existence of everybody. So I say that if you're not in a meeting, you will be assigned to one. So that's the next habit, right? So meetings are really critical to keeping the company to slow things down. If you can have an email and get it done, no, don't do that. Doesn't make sense. So you better have a meeting, right? And I have a whole thing about meeting culture, about meetings lasting forever, about how employees, there's defibrillators and oxygen tanks in the meetings for people to pass out. You need to have water in there because you might be in there for hours. And then I talk about how people being nauseous in meetings. So, then after meetings, the next thing after meetings that I talk about is customer service. So I talk a lot about, I say human contact with customers is prohibited. And I'm sure many of us have had the experience where, you call and all you get is a voicemail. You get this menu, this cryptic menu. You can't reach a human being. It's almost impossible, and the menu itself doesn't have the choices that a normal human being would need to get what they need. So it's very important in a dysfunctional company to make sure nobody talks to customers. They should be, treated poorly. So I call it the customer disservice, and I call it, the customer dance, the tango to kind of drive customers away. That's next is customer disservice. And then after that, I talk about driving out the best employees. So here I talk about actually those two chapters, those two habits are based kind of on a fundamental principle of the dysfunctional company. The dysfunctional company has two enemies. It's employees and it's customers. Now, customers are not inside the company, so they can be ignored and driven away. But employees are kind of like a toothache that's in the company. You can't just kind of ignore them, right? So, employees expect to be paid. They expect to have, benefits. I mean, at some point you've got to draw the line. A lot of this stuff it just can't be allowed. But a lot of it I talk about is poor treatment of employees, and that kind of relates to the turf battles where you have hierarchies and people battling each other. Employees should be ignored. All these companies talk about empowerment, and we want to hear what the employees have to say. Our employees are our greatest resource. And then the next day they have a mass layoff. I have a lot. That's probably the longest habit in the book. I talk about layoffs. I talk about employee onboarding. I call it employee disorientation procedures, where employees are kind of fed, all of this garbage about the company.
Joe, I'm sorry to interrupt. Listening to you, I just see that you have a great future in stand-up comedy. And I'm thinking, My God, if there was ever one of the episodes of the Seinfeld show or the Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm show, they would love you. I could see the three of you walking around a company evaluating it, and you just being the prodding eye and telling them and getting them into trouble, and they do their usual shtick. But it would be so funny. I think you've got a hit right there.
I was always the guy that said the unthinkable, the crazy thing in meetings and things like that. I mean, I was at a company where they had a ritual. This was also in that employees chapter, where they had a ritual that anytime an executive came from the headquarters on a Monday morning, you knew someone was going to die, right? You knew there was going to be blood on the floor. So you had to check under your feet to make sure there wasn't blood spilling. So I was at this company, and this very powerful vice president was fired. And then they call us all into a meeting in the room, and they tell us what happened. And they ask, are there any questions? And I raise my hand and I say, do we all still report to Patty? And Patty was his administrative assistant, who was the person you always had to talk to get to him. They did not find that funny. But, I did survive another 6 months before I, again, was part of a layer of management in that company that got axed for, I don't even know why.
But by the way,
didn't matter. I was gone.
I think if anybody at a company is doing a roast, if they start reading your book, they'll get so many ideas and so many inspirations. Before we go further, though, Joel, I'd like to let our audience know, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Joel Dubin, D-U-B-I-N. His book is The 7 Habits of Highly Dysfunctional Companies. And Joel, can you give us a website where we can find out more?
Yes, I have a website called dysfunctionalcompany.com. And that has some introduction to this book, as well as I have another humor book that I wrote. And then years ago, I wrote a book about cybersecurity, which is up there as well. And then a little brief bio about me and links to the Amazon pages where you can actually buy the books. So that's up there. And then there's an email address on there if someone would like to contact me or tell me their own personal horror story.
I think that would be fun. I think that'll be your next book, horror stories of dysfunctional companies. I like that.
Tell me what happened. How did you survive? I always call myself the adult survivor of the corporate world. So you were asking me, Bill, about the 7 habits. We didn't get to the very last one, which was that the company shouldn't serve the common good. And there I talk about how I have what's called the DTP, the AMDTAP. I have a lot of acronyms in there. That's part of the habit about poor communication, which stands for the Asshole Management Development Training Program. And in that, I say that really the only way to get ahead in a dysfunctional company is to be an asshole. And I tell you ways to train your people to be complete jerks and to be micromanagers and megalomaniacs. And so that's called the AMDTAP program. And then when those people retire or they leave, they can do real damage by going into government using all of the skills they learned at the dysfunctional company. But kind of on a side note, I also talk about, how some of these companies, they talk about, as I said before, employees are important, then they have mass layoffs, or we're into the environment, we're carbon neutral, and then you look, the company's polluting, somewhere, that kind of a thing. Kind of interesting because today, since I wrote the book, we've had all these protest demonstrations about the Middle East and companies talking about whether they're going to hire these people and free speech. And I didn't really talk about that at all. It's something to think about. It's kind of a new area, but it fits along kind of the same idea, the company not serving the common good. Do you allow people to speak about these sensitive issues or do you not? Or does it even have a place in the business?
Joel, what kind of reaction do you get from executives? When they see you, do they bring out the old tomatoes to throw or a bucket of water?
It's really funny. So I recently had dinner with an executive, was a retired executive of a major Fortune 500 company. He thought the book was hilarious. And I was when I gave him the book, I thought, oh, gosh, is he going to like this? Or he's going to say, oh, that's not my company, that kind of a thing. He said to me, he thought, gosh, there's an edge in this book. It sounds like you were angry. And I said, well, yeah, it's kind of therapy. But I think that I haven't, just a few executives have looked at the book and have liked it. But I think for executives, it would kind of be a mixed bag. Some will, be in denial. Oh, that's not my company. We don't act that way. And I'm in touch with the employees. I know what's going on. I'm not in an ivory tower. And others who can laugh at themselves are very would find it very funny. But I do find people that work in offices really love the book and can relate to it.
Oh, I think the average worker, definitely that. And the truly good executive might be knocked back a little bit, like someone saying you looked funny because you got a grape on your face or a mark, and then you wipe it off, but you've just been embarrassed a little bit. But better to be embarrassed than have the company go down the tubes or have workers lose their jobs or stockholders lose their money. We're all going to be embarrassed somewhere along the way. We're going to lose a few of the battles. So better to find out more or less in the background than get hit with things. Did you ever go to a company and really get surprised and have people come up to you and say, we got 5 of the 7 or 6 of the 7. Do you think I should start sending out resumes, and would you like a copy?
I've been at some companies that were pretty severely dysfunctional where I did have employees come up to me and say, I'd like to get out of here. Can you help me? But it was actually more the exception than the rule, because a lot of companies are sensitive about that. And as an outside consultant, there were often rules about, poaching from your customers. And I also found a lot of employees would complain, for example, about, the bureaucratic structure at the company. I had frequently, for example, where I would be dealing with a team and I'd deal with that team project after project, year to year, and so on. And they'd have a new manager and they'd have a new boss, and they didn't know if the boss even understood what they did. It's very important in a technical field to have your manager at least understand your technology. And they were like pools of expertise that were floating on a sea of garbage, I used to say. So I had a lot of people complain about things, and that's kind of some of these things actually were common complaints. I'm in too many meetings, or they don't listen to us, or we're always constantly being reorged and moved around. We don't know what day it is, and customers are unhappy. We don't know why, and they can't get to us, and so that it kind of developed over years and years, kind of like a fungus, No,
and I think that sometimes it's so true, and I think even it can be a good faith mistake, like someone gives out a phone number and doesn't realize it was changed, or that might be the weekday phone number. And of course, it becomes humorous when we hear it from you, and in a humorous vein that you tell it, because it is a rather oddity or a difficult thing for the consumer to live with. But as consumers, we all live with that, and we've had adventures. And I think even if people just each gave you 2 of their consumer stories or business stories like this, that you would have volumes of next books to go, and you'd be putting them out one a month.
I do mention in the employee disorientation that employees are given a list of phone numbers, many of which have been disconnected or no longer in use, and that the people listed in there have either died at their desks or don't work at the company anymore. So, I have a big thing in there about, dead employees who actually try to get work done and they drop dead at their desk. These employees, I say, should be propped up at their desk so people can walk by and they can be an example to other employees, like, don't do that. Don't try to do a good job. You might drop dead at your desk, So I have a whole thing about cubicle culture and how row captains, you have rows and rows of cubicles. You've been in companies that look like they look like a prison cells on top of each other. In fact, some companies, I think prison is better than being in the company. I don't know, others are not,
Oh, so I'm sure. And I'm sure from some of the examples, I was going to ask you, does anybody come back with you and say, like you have a point you make that if it makes sense, don't do it. Do employees come to you and say, I'll give you 3 examples in our company which fits that perfectly, or do you collect those?
I just see it. I don't need to be told. A lot of times just, watching what's going on. I mean, meetings were a frequent thing where people, I in some cases I saw people, they went from meeting to meeting to meeting. And I said, maybe you should have your headphones surgically attached to your head. Why bother? That kind of a thing. And I also have a thing in there I call the meeting police, so these are people in the hallway with armbands that say MP. If they see someone in the hall, they'll say, are you in a meeting? And if you say that you are not in a meeting, they will put you in a meeting. It doesn't matter if the meeting has anything to do with what you're doing. But in answer to your question directly, Bill, people would come up to me with various things, and just I kind of file it away mentally. And this is the book. This is the results of years and years of of organizational psychotherapy.
And I think a lot of good comedy. Joel, before we go further again, I'd like our audience to know that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Joel Dubin, D-U-B-I-N. His book is The 7 Habits of Highly Dysfunctional, keyword, dysfunctional companies. And Joel's going to tell us the website where we can learn more.
Yes, so I have a website, dysfunctionalcompany.com, and that has a lot of background about the book, a little bio about me, links to buy this book and another humor book that I've written, and also about my actual cybersecurity book. There's also links to press interviews, and I did win an award for the book from the Book Fest. It was the award winner, was the first place in business humor. So that's all on that website. There's also an email where I can be contacted, and feel free to send me your corporate horror stories.
I think that collection will, again, I'm sure that's going to be coming out, and you're going to be in touch with me about it, because I can just see you have that knack of writing it. Now, you even have a section where you talk about, you say you were an auditor, and
yes.
You call the auditors and lawyers the business blockers. Now,
yes.
aren't you guys and the lawyers, and I'm one of the lawyers, so...
I know, I got to be sensitive, Bill. Don't want to offend you.
No, I don't get offended, but aren't those people, and I mean, you and me too, we're trying to keep the company out of trouble, and I'll tell you a funny story at the end, but aren't they really doing good for the company?
You know, I do have a paragraph in there where I say that in a functional company, lawyers do keep the company out of trouble. Auditors do make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, so that when maybe external people come in to do kinds of reviews. But there were plenty of times, Bill, where, there was something going on. The attorneys would come in and go, the answer is no. What's the question? Or they didn't understand the business. That was common. Or auditors who were just incompetent, or there were so many rules in a dysfunctional company that if you sneeze the wrong way, you're going to get cited for something, and that kind of a thing. So yes, I do say, I do have a paragraph in there. I do, pay homage to the good work of good lawyers and good auditors, within the company. So yes, absolutely. But there's just too many times where I saw them, slowing things down, getting in the way, or sometimes outright abusive. I mean, there were auditors that would swoop into one company they'd set up in a conference room, shut the door, shut the shades, and they'd start summoning people in. And I kind of created this whole thing about, my manager told me I can, under the Geneva Convention, I only have to say my name, my title, and my employee ID number, that kind of a thing. So,
Joel, I'll just add a little bit to that. On my end of things, as a lawyer, the company would always want to know, what's the law on this and what should we do? And I would tell them that, and they go, good, thank you. And then I'd say, so what do you think? And they said, we think we're going to make a business decision. And the translation of that, and you're laughing, and I can see that already because you know what that means.
They ignore you.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you, Bill. You did the right thing. You told us the law. Now we're going to ignore you. But it's our choice, and it's our business. And it was, of course. And they made a lot of wonderful decisions, and the business grew exponentially until other things happened. But, there's a way of doing it. And, hey, that's the way things go.
Well, I saw companies where risk analysis meant that if it was cheaper to go through litigation than to fix the problem, they would actually prefer to go through litigation. I had seen that a couple times. So that's exactly right up your alley, Bill. That your attorneys probably told, we need to do this. They go, thank you very much. We'll see you later. And we don't lay you
I've
off.
been told just exactly what you said by other people, and I've actually seen it and more or less interpreted that that's what the company was doing. The risk of litigation or problems, you'd either pay off somebody or settle it fairly quickly, and most people didn't want to wait years in court to get a couple of $100 or a couple of $100 or a couple of $1,000. So they would, go for a medium settlement. It's a win-win for everybody, and the company would move on with what they did. So now what about, though, when you have these situations, aren't there those nice people out there called consultants, and they wear suits and they're pretty rich and they have cufflinks made of gold and a few diamonds in them, and they come in and straighten everything? And why are you laughing at me so hard?
Well, those consultants they're just leeching off the company, man. They're high praise. Now, again, there's plenty of consultants that have done great work and give great advice and great strategy advice, but sometimes They're people that come in, they don't understand the business, they don't understand the industry. A lot of it is based on management fads, right? And then the big thing about consultants, now, as a security consultant, I would actually work with them to implement fixes. But there's consultants, they come in, as you say, with their cufflinks and their suits, and they make really slick PowerPoint presentations, and then they leave. And they don't see the results of either the good things they did or the chaos that they may have created. So that's kind of where I was going with that. A lot of times consultants, they come in, they give you ideas, some good, maybe some not so good, then they leave, and then they don't really see the results of what they do.
Now, what's wrong with these big fancy company events where we see, and in fact, you're laughing again. A lot of times in movies, we see it all of a sudden from the back of the room, and there's hundreds of people there, stockholders. Someone gets up in a nice suit. We're going to rule this industry, and the crowd roars. Isn't that good? It builds up morale. It gets everybody rolling.
Well, what I was talking about is I was at plenty of retreats, as I call them, or meetings where they were sometimes just excuses to go party. Or this was the substitute for strategy. Strategy requires work and planning and thinking, right? But it's much more fun to have like a meeting with, circus performers and sword swallowers and celebrities singing and all that, and getting everybody all emotionally involved, and everybody goes home and they feel good, So that's what I was talking about that, Bill. You are correct. There are, meetings or events where certain factions get together and they can actually do good things for the company. So, but there were too many times where, a lot of these things, they were just crazy events. I went to one where the big event was, this demolition car derby thing. And, where people were driving these cars and stuff like that in one of those rings, what does this have to do with what, is it build up the team? I don't know. It annoyed me more than anything.
Joel, I want to take out of your book, because we're going to wrap up in a few seconds, but
Great.
A quote from you, and you say, and it kind of sums up everything. It's easier to blame an individual than solve a problem. And I think that says it all about your book, and really a lot of fun. And I can't wait to see you either on Seinfeld or Larry David or one of those late night shows. We've had a lot of fun today. Before we wrap up, please give us the website once again.
Okay, dysfunctionalcompany.com. That has information about the books, where you can purchase them. It has an email address where you can contact me if you like a little bio and background, and of course, humor about companies and what to look for.
And for our audience, once again, our guest has been Joel Dubin, Dubin. The book is The 7 Habits of Highly Dysfunctional Companies. Joel, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Bill. I very much appreciate it.
It was a lot of fun. I'd like our audience to know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.